Hey guys, welcome back to the Squirrels Gaming Corner, and today we're going to talk about the 20 best plug-and-play characters going into 2023. Just before we get into this, I do want to say this is all my opinion, and it does kind of take what I think makes a character good. Not everyone will agree with this, it's just my thoughts, so let's get into it. At number 20, we have Captain America Sam Wilson. The highlights for his hit and character are that he generates energy with his special. He gives his team speed bar per number of enemies on the field with his ultimate. He has taunt, deflect, and counter built in. And when he counters, he gets more deflect, so it makes him very tanky without having to have super high health. He gives defense up and speed up on his special. And he has some wider skill and adventure synergies that I think will make him very good for a long time. This means that he can slot into teams like Wave 1 Avengers for newer players and Rebirth for veteran players, and still provide a lot of good value. I get the most use out of him in the skill lane of Doom, and he is phenomenal. I think even when we do get a new skill team, I can see him slotting into it. Also, I think he can work very well in War and Crucible, whenever you need an energy battery, whenever you need a tank, whenever you need speed bar. He fills so many uses on the team, and is a really great support unit. At number 19, we have Doctor Strange Heartless. Heartless is all control and damage, but he does have a lot of armor mechanics that make him very good. He has an AoE buff flip on his basic, which is just amazing for basic attack. He also has a huge AoE on his ultimate. It scales pretty in the amount of debuffs and buffs on himself and the primary target, which means that it can hit really hard. I'm talking, it can regularly hit for over 1 million damage, depending on the right buffs he has. He also gets offense up and speed up on the death of an enemy. It gets offense up first, and then it moves to speed up. And that means that even though his ultimate is a furry ability, he can get to it very fast. It gives him buffs to fuel it, and it gives him focus so he can flip buffs and hit harder. His crit mechanic is what makes him really stand out to me, though. He has 50% crit damage and 50% crit chance, which is just crazy when you think about it, and it works very well with his basic and ultimate. He's going to be critting constantly. I think he might actually have an almost 100% crit chance, and it makes his damage so much higher than it would otherwise. And that's what, combined with his ultimate and the offense up he gets, his ult can easily go up the field. And I would honestly say he hits harder than Morgan Le Fay on Dark Code. His special does a speed bar rewind, which is nice. It's not nearly as potent as the air stuff on this list, but it is nice to have. And he also has barrier on turn, which is very nice. And he heals on turn if charged. He gets charged from his ultimate, and then he heals for 20% of his max health and uses a charge each turn. This makes him really good in like Dark Dimension, because he'll heal up and then wait some turns, let him get low again, and heal back up. Very good character. I really like this guy. I think a lot of people sleep on him or just think he's good on Dark Code. But his kit is probably one of the better cosmic characters, I'd say, for DD5. Even without any synergy. And he also kind of reminds me of a weaker version of the Eternals. He has that buff flip, he has a speed bar rewind, and he has a huge damage. It kind of reminds me of a lighter version of Eternals. But all in all, amazing character, we like him. At number 18, we have Nemesis. Nemesis is one of the newer characters on this list, but he is so good. His main thing is that he does percentile damage and healing. His basic hits primary and adjacents for 5% and heals the Death Seed himself for that damage. His special does 10% on primary and adjacent and distributes that to anybody. And his ultimate hits everybody for 10% and distributes that to anybody. This means that he is probably one of the better healers in this game in terms of general healing. And it also means that if you put him next to a battery, he will be doing a ton of damage to the enemy team. And I think the best way to compare him to is Omega Red with less controlled effects, more support effects. And as we'll see later on this list, Omega Red is phenomenal, and that means Nemesis is also a really strong character. He also puts out slows and bleeds for 2 turns on his ultimate. That's kind of less great compared to what he does otherwise, but it still is worth mentioning. And he also gives himself speed up on his special, which makes him a little bit faster. He is one of the slower characters, but what he does when he does get a turn, more makes up for that. At number 17, we have Gambit. The biggest thing that you need to know about Gambit is that whenever an enemy makes a turn, he attacks the lowest health enemy. I think it's non-summoned, and applies heal block to them. That's probably the biggest thing that you need to know about him, and that's just because he can constantly target the lowest health ally. And even though you can have the enemy team under control, Gambit can still be killing you even if he doesn't get a turn off. Also, whenever he gets a crit, he gains evade, and when he has evade, he gets 25% crit chance and 25% crit damage. This means that he has a pretty consistent loop of between doing a ton of damage and also dodging a lot. That makes him very scary. He also has a 0 turn or a 0 energy special that puts out bleeds, and it also does ability block once a match when he has charged. Very good move. I really like that move as well. His ultimate does an AoE disrupted and crap ton of damage. I think it's 560%. It's just a really good character, one that I really recommend building. He also, in Crucible, whenever an enemy takes a turn, he gets 20% speed bar. Which is completely absurd, really. It means that even without any unlimited numbers, in Crucible, this guy is going to be a major threat, and that you have to watch out for. It also makes his third turn ultimate a lot more palatable when he goes that fast. Finally, he has a safety mechanic in his passive that gives him stealth and immunity when he drops below 50% health. And while he's under stealth, he gains 50% drain, which that drain then goes on to help him heal back up and get back to a healthier place. Also, I think that drain, while he's under stealth, means that his passive attacks are getting drained, so they're really hitting up pretty fast once he gets hit low enough. And that's just what I really look for in these characters. They've got to have some really good sustain built in, as well as having really high damage. It fits all those rows, and that's why he makes this list. At 16, we've got Baron Zemo. Baron Zemo is a really old character at this point. I think he's been out for about over 2 years now, but he still holds a really good place in the meta. He has the fastest ability block in the game, and it also chains slow. I think it's a rebound chain to 4 targets. And that means that you can shut down, say, Spider Weaver in Crucible, which is a big thing that he's used for. It means you can shut down somebody like, Rogue or Gambit. And that's just what makes him really good. And if you're wondering what his speed is, his passive gives him speed. So with his passive in place, he's at 158.2 speed. The fastest character naturally, I think, is 133 speed, and that's Red Hulk. So Zemo will go before pretty much anybody. He also, on spawn and whenever he ults, he gains charged. And the next turn that he has, when he's charged, he's going to clear all buffs on all enemies. Which is a really good move. It means that you can get past free taunting tanks to put that ability block out. It means that you can get past defense up. It's pretty good. He also has a permanent kill on minions. with his special and with his passive attack. That used to be a lot more impactful against Mercs and Hydra. Nowadays, it's not as good, but it's still nice to have in case we ever do get a minions rework. And finally, he spawns with immunity and defense up, and that applies to non-minion Hydra. And he also gives 40% speed to non-minion Hydra. The only two that I think that really matters for is Winter Soldier and Red Skull. Winter Soldier just got a rework. He hits incredibly hard now. So if you put the Rebirth team with Zemo, Winter Soldier will go incredibly fast, spawn with defense up and immunity, and he's just going to be a massive threat. So if you have him built higher than the rest of the Rebirth, Zemo is a really good plug-and-play character. And that also applies to Red Skull. Red Skull is even older than Zemo is. He is pretty much a dead character at this point, but his special gives 30% speed bar to all allies. So giving him that defense up, immunity on spawn, and making him a lot faster so he can get to that special is a really good play and still gives him some use in the meta. In terms of where I use Zemo, I use him a lot in Cosmic Crucible and more. He's really good for that early ability block. He's really good with Rebirth. He's just really good whenever you need to set a character down before they can get a turn off. At 15, we have Emma Frost. Emma Frost is one of those characters that I thought would last a while, but I had no idea she'd still be in the meta this long since her release. I think she's older than Zemo. I'm not sure on that though. But she came about during the Black Order meta in Arena, which says a lot about how her viability is that she's still using Arena today. The biggest thing about her is that she gives it minus 10% speed stat to all enemies. This is not giving a speed bar rewind, this is reducing their actual stat. If a character has 100 speed, this means that they're going to be functioning at 90% speed. And that's just really good for mirror matches. It's really good whenever they're just trying to get somebody to go first, like when you're fighting Gamma. It is something really big that a lot of people don't really think about as powerful. But in a turn-based game, that is huge. She also has a total cleanse on her ultimate ability. It clears all buffs from all enemies. It also mind controls the two highest damage characters on the field to protect the primary target. It gives them blind. She has a way to cleanse all debuffs on all allies on her special. She puts out slow on all enemies. And when she gets charged from her special, she gets 400% armor, 500% resistance, and she always, regardless of charge, heals for 15% of her max health on turn. And this means that even though she's a little bit power crept to this point, she can stay in a fight and have pretty good sustain, despite her low health. She also applies immunity to all villain mutants on her special. This is because she's not a Marauder, but supposed to be used with the Marauder team. But the reason I put it on this list is you can use her on Weapon X, you can use her on, Death Seed is a big one. Anything that has villain mutants, she can synergize with. And I think that's really good when you're trying to use her, but don't have a team for her. That's a really good mechanic. Although her main purpose is still to make mirror matches easier and to get speed advantage. At 14, we have Spider-Woman. As you can see, I've not really built my Spider-Woman up very much. And that's not because she's a bad character, but because I've always had bigger priorities. But as a standalone character, she is phenomenal. She has a very fast ability block at 128 speed. And not only does this apply ability block, it applies heal block and offense down, I think for 2 turns. And it's also changed to 4 or 5 enemies, and then heal blocks and offense down as them. With how fast she goes, she can shut down a team, she can stop their healing, she can reduce their damage, and ability block the priority target. And even though she's not as fast or doesn't do the buff clear Zemo, She has a lot better stats than Zemo, due to being a newer character. And that really gives her a lot of viability, because she can actually do damage to the enemy. Zemo is mainly control at this point. Spider-Woman can hit really hard. On her ultimate, she flips buffs to debuffs and then extends them. And this is also a chain attack. And that's really deadly as well. On turn, she heals for 20% of her max health, meaning that she does stay in the fight for a while. And her basic also is a chain attack and applies defense down. Spider-Woman is one of those characters I think a lot of people sleep on. But she is really good. She has a lot of different uses. You don't need to use her with A-Force at all. And she kind of reminds me, the most comparable thing is Zemo. But she just has such staying power. She also reminds me of Symbiote Spider-Man, as well as her basic being pretty much identical. But she is such a good character. I really recommend building her. You won't regret it. I'm going to take my advice soon on that. And once you start seeing her pop up in my Crucible videos, she's going to be a great plug-and-play character. At 13, we have Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi is one of those characters that I think a lot of people didn't expect much out of. But when he was released, and people started testing him, he did incredible things. First of all, is his ultimate, as well as all of his abilities, but specifically his ultimate, does huge damage. The reason behind this is kind of like Doctor Strange Heartless. The amount of enemies on a primary target, or the amount of buffs, on a primary target, increases his damage by 75%. So if you're fighting somebody like Captain Sam, or other characters like Doctor Doom, Dormammu, they have a lot of buffs. This ult can easily hit for 600-700k on all enemies. He also has something that I think a lot of people sleep on in his passive. On crit, he gains a deflect, and when he has deflect, he gains 35% crit chance and 20% block amount. This mechanic means that he is constantly blocking, as well as constantly critting, and it's just a cycle, kind of like what I talked about earlier with Gambit, but this is a lot stronger, I think. It means that even though he has a low health pool by today's standards, he still can hang in a fight because of all these blocks. His ult also has a speed bar rewind. It's only 10%, but it's still really good. And then I just want to talk about all the support he has in this kit. His ultimate gives him speed up. His special gives him 2 counters. His special heals him for 50% of his max health. It cleanses all debuffs, and it gives him 50% speed bar. For our allies, it gives them 10% healing and cleanses 1 debuff. And all of these effects that are for him also apply to heroes for hire. So even outside of war, he does a lot for that team. But even just doing them for himself is really good. It means that even though he doesn't have any innate healing in his passive, he can stay in a fight really well as doing huge damage. He is getting a little bit older, but his damage with the right conditions, like putting defense down out or putting a bunch of buffs on the target, means that he hits really hard and still has a firm place in the meta. At number 12, we have Captain America. The reason that Captain America is so high on this list is because he puts up defense up and immunity for 2 turns with a special. And that's just something I think means a lot. Immunity is one of the most powerful debuffs in the game. Or buffs in the game. And putting it out for 2 turns to anybody is phenomenal. Especially on an ability that only takes free energy. He also gives out energy on a special. On a full team of Avengers and Rebirth, he has a 100% block chance. I know I said I wouldn't talk about synergy. There are 20 Avengers in the game, not counting Cap, as well as 4 Rebirth. So it's not difficult to get all the characters you need to get that 100% block chance. And even if you don't have it, he has really high block chance anyway. He gives 2 deflects to anybody on spawn. He gets 60% speed bar on his ultimate. It's only a 3 turn cooldown. So you could say that his ult and special are more on a 2.5 turn cooldown. Just because of all the speed bar he gets. He taunts, which is kind of standard, but it does mean that he takes hits very well. He has buff clear on his ultimate, which is not super outstanding, except for the fact that it has focus added. So kind of like Sharon Carter's ultimate, like Kestrel's ultimate. You can clear a lot of buffs with it that you wouldn't otherwise normally. And his basic applies offense down with a chain attack. Super good. All of his abilities are really outstanding. And outside of Rebirth, I think he has a lot of plug and play potential. I've not built mine up very much yet. This is still from where he was at in the Wave 1 days. I want to build him up once I finish up my Death Seed Unlimited and start building Rebirth up. At number 11, we have Archangel. Archangel just came out this patch, and I have a very small one at only 4/5. But his kit does so much damage. I love it. The most impactful thing, I think, is that whenever an enemy dies, he attacks the lowest health enemy and rewinds 10% speed bar for the entire enemy team. That's kind of wild. And the big thing I think it does is it cancels out Hela in a matchup, because her Greg only does 10% speed bar rewind. This counteracts that. And it kind of also is like Deathpool, in that whenever an enemy dies, you get punished for it. Whenever he gets a kill, he gives himself and Death Seed ability energy. And I think his special is 4 energy, his ultimate is free. So if he starts getting kills on an AoE, he can easily ult back to back or special back to back in the right conditions. His ultimate steals all buffs off of an enemy and then nukes them. I think it's 700% piercing, which, for reference, that's what Ultron does, Iron Man does. I think there's another character that does it. But basically, that's about as high as modifiers get, and it just hits incredibly hard. I've almost one-shot 250k Icaruses with mine, and mine is very small by comparison. I have almost one-shot almost 300k Omega Reds. The damage on this guy is just insane. His basic also puts out an incredible amount of bleed that I think is really good. And on special, if you get a kill, you can put offense down on the entire enemy team, which is really good in its own right. But the main thing that he does is damage and his passive pings. At number 10, we have Zombie Iron Man. Well, he does a lot of things, and even without Hela, he's an incredible character. On enemy turn, if they take damage from bleed, they are mind controlled to attack the most injured enemy. This may not sound like much, but on the right character, this is incredible. I think the best case for this is Darkhold, where you can just nuke somebody if Morgan has bleed. I've seen Morgan almost one-shot Agatha because of Zombie Iron Man's mind control. His ultimate is also phenomenal. It clears barrier on the entire enemy team, it extends any debuffs, and applies defense down. Barrier is really good in this game, especially with teams like Darkhold and Eternals using it to great effect. And being able to just clear it all in a single attack is just insane. His basic and his ultimate stop any revives, which is kind of incredible. With characters like Dormammu, Infinity Watts, revives are really scary, and you can stop them pretty easily with them. His special does a 2-turn ability block and Disrupted with added focus, which is really good. His special and basic also mind control enemies, which can help even more in addition to his passive. And on war offense, if he is above 50% health, your team can't be stunned and the enemy team can't get death proof. Which is something I think a lot of people don't think about, but it really is impactful in the right circumstance. Especially against characters like Dormammu and Spider Weaver. They will not land that stun. They can't. Even if they apply the trauma, the stun is not going to go through. It's incredible. Unless, I know he gains a lot with Hela, and you really need Hela for him to be one of the best power duos in the game. But standing alone, I don't think you should sleep on this character. And even as a new player, if you've got him, you should build him. At number 9, we have Dr. Doom. The biggest thing about Doom is that his ultimate gives 300% speed bar to himself and the highest damage character. As we've seen, this isn't going away, ever. We at first used it with characters like Longshot and Shatterstar. Then we got using it with characters like Kestrel. Then Omega Red. Now we're using it with characters like Morgan Le Fay and Archangel. His ultimate's never going to go away. It also full heals 2 characters and cleanses all debuffs from 3 characters. This move is probably the best ultimate in the game. I hesitate to say that, but I think it is. It has a 10-turn cooldown, but as we'll see in a few minutes, he has ways to gain energy. But also, when he gets to 3 turns from it, it's more like a 7-turn cooldown once you initially pop off with it. So it's not as bad as people think it is. It's still high cooldown, but with the amount of turns he takes, it kind of makes up for it. He also summons a Doombot on each turn, and as he gets different amounts of Doombots, he gets buffs. I think it goes 2 Doombots to get 2. You get defense up, 3 Doombots to get offense or speed up, 4 Doombots to get offense up. When you drop him below 50% health, he gets 50% speed bar and energy, meaning that once you hit him low enough, he will ult and probably wipe your team. His special is a huge AoE that gains damage per Doombot ally, and it also applies heal block. Even without the ult, this move hits really hard and is a big threat. His basic is an unavoidable disrupt, which is really good on certain characters. And he also cannot be stunned. When you apply stun to him, he gains slow and removes the stun, which is kind of unfortunate, but it does mean that he's very good at powering through. You can set him down with ability block though, but you're not going to stop him with a stun. Next, at number 8, we have Hela, and by extension, we have Greg dominant there in the corner. First, I'm just going to talk about Greg. Hela spawns Greg, and when Greg dies, she summons another Greg. It's an endless cycle. When you kill Greg, or when he kills himself, which he does with a special, you rewind speed bar for 10% on the entire enemy team. This was originally added so Black Panther couldn't cause a glitch by looping Greg kills. He'd eventually use speed bar. But in practice, this is an incredibly powerful ability. His special also puts 2 turns of bleed and the heal block out, and it also means that you can't revive. And then his basic also applies heal block. Greg on his own, even if Hela didn't do anything else, summoning Greg's is just incredibly potent and makes her a useful character. But in addition, her basic and ultimate stop revives if you kill somebody with them. Her ultimate clears all barrier and spread 4 debuffs from the primary target to all other targets. She has really good sustain from her passive, which she heals on turn, and she also gets healed from Greg. And her special also applies 2 turns to disrupt and bleed, which are really good. All in all, she does a ton of control effects. She has a ton of sustain. She's just a fantastic character. And I'd honestly recommend taking her to 6 or 7 red stars, tier 16. She's that good, you won't regret it. At number 7, we have Kestrel, aka the hard counter to Hela. With her passive, she gains a charged on spawn, and while she is charged, she stops all summons and all clones. This means that characters like Phoenix, like Hela, where's my Ultron, Kingpin, Mr. Negative, she can shut them all down, and once she takes a turn, after somebody has attempted to summon, she uses that charged. Her passive attacks whenever an enemy with defense down was attacked. and it goes for the lowest health ally. So this is kind of like Gambit, but a little bit more conditional. But it does hit a lot harder than Gambit's pings do. On turn, she heals for 20% for max health and clears all debuffs, and she heals for 5% per debuff she clears. This healing means that she can be covered in bleeds and in red health and heal right back up to full. All of her moves apply defense down, which is kind of crazy in of itself. Her ultimate clears all buffs with a focus boost and stops reviving. And her special gives her speed up, defense up, and immunity. She's really is a complete package of utility and damage, and as well as a lot of staying power in terms of all the buffs she gets and the heals she does. I recommend taking her. I used to would say 7 red stars. Nowadays, I would only take her to 6. She is starting to fall off some, but she is still one of the best characters in the game. At number 6, we have Omega Red. Probably the best traditional and legendary in the game, not counting Horseman. Omega Red is phenomenal. He has health steal on all of his attacks. He has a 10% health steal on his basic, a 5% health steal to primary adjacent on his special, and a 10% health steal to all enemies on his ultimate. He also has trauma on his special. He applies ability block on his special and ultimate. He flips all buffs on his ultimate. He applies slow and heal block, and he rewinds the entire enemy team's speed bar. On turn, he heals for 20% of his max health, plus whatever he steals. And when he drops below 60% max health, he gets speed up and death proof. In war offense, he also has ramping up damage. He gains 10% damage on turn until it hits 30%. And the thing with Omega Red is that he can just take chunks out of the enemy team without much issue. The biggest thing that I use him for nowadays is against Gamma in Room 6 in Cosmic Crucible with Dr. Doom. Gamma is what renowned for their huge health pool, for their high damage, and with Dr. Doom and Omega Red, if he gets those free turns, Omega Red can just wipe the enemy team. You will kill Red Hulk by getting vulnerables out on him. You will probably kill Hulk too, if you're lucky. And it's all because of that health steal. We talked about how good Nemesis was. Take all of that and make it more so with Omega Red, and you'll see why he's so good. He also was I think he's the first character with trauma. And that still remains a really good ability to have. And he also is just so good. He's tanky. I think mine has over 1 million health. He heals constantly. He has his death proof mechanics. He's so sustainable. It's really good. At number 5, we have Spider Weaver. Spider Weaver is a character that right now everybody's gonna have a 7-star version of. Not many people. I didn't know that going into this. There's an old screenshot, but now everybody has to start Spider Weaver at 7 gold stars. And she is probably the best non-horseman character in the game. And that is all because of her passive. While she has charged, she lowers accuracy for all enemies by 100%. When an enemy misses, she uses it charged. And this is kind of weird how it works. Counterattacks can make her lose charged, but retaliation attacks and ISO attacks do not. And that's just, it's really scary because even characters like Morgan Le Fay, Red Hulk, they're big, devastating ultimates. If Weaver has charged, they're not going to land. They're not going to do anything. Also, any character she kills cannot be revived. Whenever you attack her or Tangled Web ally, she gets 10% speed bar and an ability energy. Her special and ult are 5 and 8 energy respectively, but her passive means that it doesn't really feel bad. It honestly feels more like 3 and 4 ability energies. Just because of how many turns she takes and how often she goes. She applies trauma and stun on her ultimate, which is devastating. You can't really overstate how devastating that move is. Because it means you can stun Dormammu, it means you can stun Doom, all these characters you wouldn't normally be able to stun, you can with her. Her special is a 30% heal to all allies, and it spreads defense up and offense up to random allies. Her basic hits multiple times and applies bleed, as well as cleansing herself. And if she doesn't have any debuffs, she cleanses allies. It doesn't have to be Tangled Web, it can be any ally. That's just what really makes her deadly. She doesn't really need Tangled Web allies, but she can just really plug and play. Her special also is an unavoidable, unblockable chain that can chain into stealth. And it stops revives, which all of her attacks do. It's just, this character is probably, she's a protector, but she also does a lot of support mechanics, and she also hits really hard and does a lot of damage. I would say she's also required for Apocalypse, so take her as high as you want. As you can see, mine's tier 16, level 90, ISO 4. I'm probably going to take her to tier 17 when I'm able to. She's probably my first priority after I get Morgan Le Fay done. Just because he's that good. At number 4, we have Rogue. I'm just going to let you read what her special does. Look in game and see it. But it basically is like all the debuffs except for stun. You're putting for 2 turns on the enemy. You're gaining 2 turns of every buff in the game, I think. I think it's every buff. And you're also rewinding your target speed bar by 50% and gaining 50% speed bar yourself. Basically, this move makes your Rogue unkillable. You can get through her, but you're not getting that taunt off. You're not getting her buffs off. You just kind of have to wait for it to wear off. And that character that she hits is going to be out of the fight for a long time. It's probably the worst move to get hit with in the game. And it's just still devastating. Her special and ult are both unavoidable, which is really good with Spider Weaver being in the meta now. It's good to have some unavoidable attacks. Her ultimate has a targeted stun as well as a buff steal, 2 buffs from all enemies. Her basic hits multiple times and clears barrier. She has really good self-sustain with a 10% heal on turn, as well as defense up on turn. But the big thing is that Rogue is her special. Her special is what makes her important. And it's just because it's such a deadly move. There's no recovering from that unless you can put taunt up on another character and let that character wait for them to wear off. But normally it's a death sentence. And that's what makes Rogue so scary. She's also really fast at 127 speed. So there's not really controlling her before she pops off. You can use like Spider-Woman or Zemo. But normally there's no getting around it. You can't even use Spider Weaver to get around this because it's unavoidable. So that's about Rogue. I like her as a skirmisher. You can also use her as a striker. You can use her as Raider. And pretty much any ISO works with her. I really like characters like that. But skirm is what I go for because you really want those debuffs to land. Next, I've got some honorable mentions that I wanted to talk about. And these are characters that didn't make the list, but I do want to talk about because they are very good standalone. First is Loki. Oops. And his big claim to fame here is that he gives Mystic controllers 10% speed bar on spawn. I've got a list of the Mystic controllers here. We've got Cloak, Dr. Doom, Hela, Mr. Negative, Morgan Le Fay, Cersei, Scarlet Witch, Nico Monroe, Mighty Thor, Mordo, Morbius, and Nobu. These are some really meta characters. Characters like Dr. Doom, Morgan, and Cersei, if you're doing a mirror match, whichever one goes first kind of decides who's going to win. That was the arena meta for a long time with Eternals and Darkhold, and Loki was a huge player in that. He also gives all enemies minus 30% resistance, which is just kind of nuts, honestly. Especially when characters like Morgan have such high resistance pools. Reducing it with Loki is a really good move. His special, which goes very early because he gets speed bar on spawn, does defense down and mind control, which is kind of wild. It mind controls 2 enemies to attack them and puts defense down on them. And this can really easily kill somebody. He also can put all the allies under stealth and summon mirror images with evade, which means that your team can heal up while they're getting through all those summons, as well as getting through the stealth. The reason he didn't make this list is because he's very old. He's not been reworked since Asgardians came out, and I think that's been over 2 years at this point. So he's just really not worth building up, because he's going to die in 1 hit. However, all of this what he does is mainly passive, and he gets that special off very early. So I don't really recommend building him, per se, because you don't need to have your Loki built. You just need to have him there, and he'll do his job fairly well. So that's about it. I think if he had better stats, he would be a lot higher on this list. Next up is Taskmaster, and he is probably my favorite character in terms of what all he does. He assists Mercs in Underworld on any turn. He always counters when he's on a Merc or Underworld team. His ultimate does blind, heal block, and bleed. I think it's 3 blinds, 2 turns of heal block, and 2 turns of bleed. It does a ton of damage, and it's unavoidable. His special does stun and offense down when it's chain attack, stun primary and offense down the other characters. His basic steals 3 buffs, while his ISO attack steals 2 buffs. He has a 25% block chance in the mount, which means that he's really good at surviving. He gains 10% damage per skill enemy, which is just kind of crazy. It means if you're fighting a full skill team, he's going to be hitting 50% harder, which is basically like having offense up the entire time. He, in war, defense, or offense, he gets 10% speed bar fill on spawn. And if he is on the Merc Underworld team, he applies taunt to the highest damage enemy on his turn. That's a mixed bag, but it can be really devastating for getting somebody focused down. The only bad side is it might not be the character you want to focus down. Like if it applies to somebody like Cersei, where they're trying to go after Icarus. But the reason that, even with all this great stuff he does, the reason he's not on this list is because how much of it relies on his team. He doesn't assist unless it's Mercs or Underworld. He doesn't counter unless he has Mercs or Underworld. If he had those 2 things, if he could counter, 100% counter chance, without the team, he'd probably be on this list, because he is a terrifying character. And the blinds on his ult, they're deadly. The heal block's deadly, the bleeds are deadly. It's just, he's such good control while also doing a ton of damage. Oh, one more thing about Taskmaster. If you're using him with the team, he's a skirmisher because of the assist. If you're using him solo, he's a striker. And finally, I have Titania. Nobody has Titania yet, so he's not been released. But she's going to be part of the upcoming Masters of Evil team. The reason I'm talking about her today is this mechanic in their passive. On turn, she gains 1 counter, and she also gains 10% crit chance per counter. And on crit, she gains 1 deflect, and gets 10% crit damage per deflect. That just seems kind of like a self-fulfilling, like a loop like Shang-Chi has, and like Gambit has. But also, whenever she gains a buff, she gets 10% speed bar, and she heals for 10% of her max health. This means that if I'm looking at it right, on turn, she's getting 10% speed bar and healing for 10% health. And if she crits on turn, she might be getting another 10% speed bar and healing for 10% health. She's going to be critting nonstop, which gives her more turns. It's just, I think this could ramp up very quickly in the right circumstance. I just don't know. She has very high damage and health. She has ability block, disrupted, and heal block on her ult, which is unavoidable. Her basic is a buff steal, as well as a self-cleanse, also unavoidable. I just think she has a lot of potential to be a really good standalone character. But I've not played with her yet. Nobody has, so that's hard to say. But it is something I want to keep an eye on. Because any mechanic like that kind of feeds itself is something that I want to keep an eye on. Back to the list, at number 3, we have Red Hulk. Probably my favorite horseman. Red Hulk is really devastating. The biggest thing is that when you hit him, he gains shards. Each charge he gets, up to a maximum of 5, gives him, I think, 10% speed, 20% counter stance, and 20% block stance. Which means that full charged, he has 199.5 speed. This is faster than anybody else in the game by a significant margin. It means he's going to counter 100% of the time, and he's going to block 100% of the time. Which means you're not getting through him, pretty much. He's not going to go down without a fight. His ultimate is a devastating buff flip. It also applies 2 turns of trauma and heal block, and puts out gamma radiation battlefield effect. And what that does is that any time an enemy takes a turn, they are unavoidably hit for 250% piercing and free bleed. That is nasty. That is going to hurt. It does a ton of damage. His ult is also, even without the battlefield effect, probably one of the better ults in the game. It's just terrifying. His special clears barrier, and it also applies 2 offense down to primary and adjacent, 20% speed by rewind. It clears revive once from a primary, but once we get the upgraded ability with the Saga, it'll be clearing revive once from free characters. That's kind of wild. That's just one of the best moves in the game. It'll totally invalidate Dormammu, I think. And basic also flips buffs. He heals for 20% of his max health on turn. He's just going to hit you really hard. He's going to put out a lot of control. And he's going to be taking a lot of turns. Even solo, once you kill the rest of the game, Red Hulk can easily solo an entire team in Crucible. And in War, he is just probably the best character in the game by a significant margin in War. And I'm really excited to get him higher up so I can build him more. But he is phenomenal. And I really conflicted between him and number 2 on who's the best horseman. And he ended up in the number 3 spot because he does take a while to ramp up, get his abilities up, while the next character opens with them. And that number 2 spot goes to Morgan Le Fay. Not really any surprise here, honestly. Her ultimate, I really just have to say go read it yourself. It spreads Disrupted Snow to primary and adjacents, trauma and ability block on all controllers, flip 2 or 3 buffs on any non-controller enemy, it rewinds speed bar for any enemy without debuffs. It hits incredibly hard, it spreads debuffs. This is probably the best ultimate in the game. This, Red Hulk, and Doctor Doom are kind of tied for best ult, I think. But this move can just shut down an entire team without much trouble. And what makes that even worse is that on spawn, she gets 5% speed bar per mystic enemy, up to 20%. Which means that there's not much you can do regarding this. She's going to go fast, she's going to ult, you're going to be in trouble. On enemy turns, she also gets 10% speed bar, and he also gets the Dark Hold. But even solo, getting that much speed bar on turn is devastating. Her special resets speed bar, gives her team speed up, and it clears all buffs from the enemy. It also full heals herself. It's crazy what else she can do. Even her basic is a buff steal, and also steals 10% max health from target. This is why I used to make her a striker, because that health steal is so devastating, you can't really recover. I've seen it one-shot Agatha's, like I said, the Zombie Iron Man. If you mind control her, that is devastating, but when you're using her, and you can control it, it hits even harder, I think. She also has let me see here. When on her full team of Dark Host, she also reduces assist chance. That's not really applicable here, but it is something you do need to mention because it makes her very scary. Finally, at number 1, we have Dormammu. Now, I know a lot of people seem to think that Dormammu is falling off or becoming less important. And then, with Apocalypse coming out, he might not be at number 1 for much longer. However, he's still going to be one of the best characters in the game for a long time. And that's because on spawn, he gives revive once to all allies if he's at 100% health. That is just incredible. Even though we have characters like Red Hulk and Hela and Zombie Iron Man who can stop revives, this is still always going to be something that is pretty deadly. And you're never going to just 100% get around it. And even if you do, he still has his charge mechanic, which he gets from a special. And that means that on turn, or on enemy turn, he flips all their buffs to debuffs. That's just something you can't work around that. It means that you can't get any buffs. Even if it's something like Sunfire who gets on turn offense up, he's going to flip it. It's just, that's such a deadly mechanic. I think it just says a lot about how good he is. He gets buffs on turn and on spawn, depending on the amount of allies with revive once he has. It goes defense up, offense up, immunity. And he also, so that means he spawns in with immunity. Which makes it so hard to control him. You can't put a slow on him or anything. His special is also a traumatized stun, which is really important like we talked about Spider Weaver. You can't just shrug off that stun. You have to wait for it to expire. No cleansing it. His ultimate is a massive heal for 40% of his max health. It gives offense up, defense up, and slow for 2 turns, and speed up for their team for 2 turns. And puts the opposite of all that on the enemy team. Again, that's something that's really hard to work around. It kind of reminds me of Ultron and his bots, but so much more deadly. When you drop him below 50% health, he gets stealth and safeguard for 2 turns. And while he has that stealth, he has a 3% block chance. And that also goes back to his basic, which it clears immunity and 1 buff if there's no immunity, which in itself is pretty good. It's an AoE, but it also has 3% drain. So when you put him in stuff like that, you're just giving him time to recover, heal up, and come back with a vengeance. His basic and ultimate, well, his ultimate's unavoidable, his basic cannot miss, which makes him very good against Spider Weaver. He cannot be stunned at all. He gains regen when you stun him. And when you ability block him, he will basic. And if ability block when he basics, he gets 80% speed bar. It's basically pointless to ability block him. And what that does is that he's going to do a ton of damage, clear some buffs, and then take the turn he was originally going to take. So don't ever ability block Dormammu. It will come back to bite you. He just had the ability to get his 5th red star and 6th red star. I took him to 5 red stars before I took Archangel to 5 red stars. I do my dark promos on that. And I'm going to take him to 6 probably before I take the Horseman to 6. I think. Just because I use him everywhere. He is a go-to in Arena that I use every day. I use him every day in Cosmic Crucible whenever I have that. He is a huge part of War. You just can't really... I don't think you're ever going to stop using Dormammu entirely. Even if it only becomes niche matchups, he's still going to be huge. And that's my top 20 plug and play characters for 2023 going into the year. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you did enjoy it, leave a comment. Check out the Discord in the description below. And have a great day. Thanks for watching.